Hi, everyone. My name is Sean Sweeney. I am the Director of Education and Special Programs at the Center for Nonprofit Advancement. We are very excited to have just a month or so ago completed our Excel Award process, the Excel Award being the Excellence in Chief Executive Leadership Award. And we're even more excited to be joined today by our winner of this year's process, Elizabeth Jones Valderrama, who you will meet again in a second. But the reason before we jump in for these videos is, in lieu of a in-person event or celebration, we decided to record these videos, these learning videos, of which there will be 4, to highlight some new and innovative practices that we learned throughout this year's process. So we have filmed, this is actually our final one that we're filming, 3 other ones, 1 other one with Elizabeth and 2 with our 2 honorable mentions, our other finalists this year, that we're very excited to be releasing shortly. So the next thing I will do is introduce Ian Schuman, who is with our award sponsor, GRF CPAs and Advisors, and is also a committee member. Over to you, Ian.
Okay, thank you, Sean. I'm really excited to be here today with our winner, Elizabeth Jones Valderrama. I wanted to take a quick second at the beginning to just thank all the other applicants and the panelists and everybody involved, and certainly our 2 honorable mentions. My name is Ian Schuman. I'm a partner in outsourced accounting at GRF CPAs and Advisors. GRF is one of the top 200 firms in the nation, and we've sponsored this award since 2007 because we're also an independent firm that's local to the DC area. I've had the pleasure of being on the selection committee for the award for 5 years, and I can tell you it feels just as fresh, inspiring, and I learn as much now as I did 5 years ago. The award recognizes excellence in individual leadership among CEOs from the DC area nonprofit community. And in this crazy tough year, that is as important and timely as ever. Every year, there are some incredible ideas that the selection committee really wants to hear more about, and we often don't get a chance to do that. So that's why I'm excited for this video series. And this topic specifically was something I know I wanted to hear more about. So back to you, Sean. Thanks.
Great, thanks, Ian. And yeah, like Ian was just saying, we actually, in our little meeting before we pressed record on this, Ian and I were both telling Elizabeth that this is actually one of the practices that we were most excited to be filming about, because it's definitely something super new and innovative, and we're excited to learn more. And also, I guess I haven't said the title, but it will be about ethical storytelling, which Elizabeth will tell us more about throughout the interview. So Elizabeth, thank you so much again for joining us. We really appreciate your time.
Oh, I'm so grateful to be here. Thank you all, and definitely for Ian and GRF for all of their sponsorship, and you all for being on the committee and all the hard work for this program. So thank you.
Great. Well, let's just jump right in. Our first question is, and also it actually might help if you can give us a little bit of background on the mission of your organization when you start talking about this, but can you just give us a short definition of what you consider ethical storytelling to be?
Yes, and so just starting to give you a brief overview of what we do at OAR. So we are OAR of Arlington, Alexandria, and Falls Church. We're a nonprofit that works kind of in 3 areas. One is we work in community service, which is doing volunteer hours in lieu of incarceration. 2, we work in reentry, which is supporting individuals and being on the journey with individuals who are incarcerated and coming home and their families. And 3, we are doing anti-racism and liberation work, so that we can end the way that we do the criminal legal system and ultimately kind of put OAR out of business. So that's kind of the overview of what we do. And I've been at OAR for 15 years, starting my 16th now. And about 5 or so years ago, we started looking at everything and thinking about everything. And I say this often through an anti-racist, racial justice and liberation kind of mindset and lens. And one of the ways that has been one of the things that we have done that I think has been really powerful since we began to look at is this idea of ethical storytelling. Now, we coined it as a term as ethical storytelling. I don't know if that actual term exists anywhere out there. We're borrowing it if it does, and if it doesn't, we'll take it. But the idea is that instead of actually, one of the things we've done for a development perspective, and I'm sure folks have heard of this idea of like you have a tour, people come, it's the Benavon model. So you have a tour, people come to the tour, you engage them in your work, and then you have this thing called an ask event. So we have done that through breakfast. And so we've been having the breakfast now let's see, so I've been at OAR for 15 years. So when I was in my second year, we started I launched this breakfast with our team, and we brought X number of people together. And one of the highlights of these breakfasts is to have individuals who have been participants of the organization's mission. So like, again, we call, instead of clients, we use the word participants because we're on a journey with them. And so we have participants come in, tell their story, and traditionally, people really want the audience, it's to motivate the audience to give more money, right? And to say, look how awesome this organization is because this person kind of is rising from the ashes like the phoenix, and look how amazing they are. So in theory, that sounds exactly what you want. The problem, though, is that what you're doing is what we were doing was having individuals retell their story over and over and over again. We traumatize them, trigger them, because some of the stories are really painful for them. And those are the ones that unfortunately most people want to hear. And then ultimately putting OAR kind of in a pedestal about how we were their savior. And none of that has really occurred. And so for us, ethical storytelling means we know that there's some amazing, powerful stories that we have been privy to, and that we might have assisted in changing lives in some way. But really, the power is in the individual, and the individual should be allowed to choose whether or not they want to publicly tell their story. So ethical storytelling for us means, instead of asking people to get up on a stage of 600 people, well, now virtual, but before it was like 600 people, and they were telling their story, crying. It was super powerful and super sad and painful. And it also triggered individuals in several ways, and I'll tell you more about that in a second. But the idea of ethical storytelling is you have the story and you have storytellers. You contract with storytellers or with actors or something along those lines, where the person who's actually telling the story isn't the actual wording of the person. Instead, you are paying the person to tell your story because their time is super valuable. So we would pay someone to say, can we use your story? They'll give it to us, and we pay them in that moment. And then every time we use their story through a storyteller or a video or a recording, we pay them again. And so they're being able to actively participate in this. And so their pictures are not featured. It's, again, different photos, etc., or actors, and their names are changed. And so we shifted to that model about 5 years ago, and it has been really an interesting experience. So that's kind of our idea in a very long definition, but that's our idea of what ethical storytelling is that you take the stories of the participants, which are so valuable, so amazing, and you give it to the world, not from the direct participant, but from an actor, so that they're not approached later. And I have a story to tell you kind of with the point in our mind where we really needed to change that.
Great. That was going to be one of my next questions. Was there something that happened that made you think more deeply about this and make you want to make the change to the new storytelling piece?
Yeah, it was. I'm so glad that you're, allowing me to share this part. We had a participant who has just been amazing. He had an incredible story, incredibly sad, and also heartwarming, and the story of success and victory for him. And we were so pleased that we had been part of his life at some point, that we wanted him to tell the world. And so before we were doing ethical storytelling, what ended up happening is, like any nonprofit who wants to make sure that everything goes well and that's 1 hour breakfast or lunch that you have, we had to prep the person. So I personally, as the executive director, was the one who was in charge. Even before that, I was the person who was in charge of prepping individuals and talking with them about their story. And I just remember hearing his story and hearing him cry every time he told it, and hearing how painful it was for him to share that, and hearing how both it was embarrassing, it was also one of the most painful moments of his life, and somehow they're having to go and relive this for us. So kind of we equate it with like seeing a therapist for something that's super traumatic, and then having your therapist tell you, hey, could you speak about it all from zero to where you are today in front of 600 people? And of course we would say absolutely not, but we were not actually thinking about it that way. And so there was a moment where you think, wow, do people owe us this because we helped them in some way? Do they feel like they owe us? Like if they don't tell their story, will they then not think they're going to get services? And so all of those things started to come to our mind. And I remember the day of the breakfast getting a call from the participant I had been talking to and saying, you know, I had a horrible night. I'm terrified of going here. And my first instinct was, I need you. It wasn't a moment with like, you know what, take care of yourself, which is what I would do today. But in that moment, I thought, I need you. I need you to go up on stage, even if it's so painful and traumatic and horrible for you, because I need this event to go well. And that afternoon after the breakfast, he did amazing. I mean, like we knew he would. And all I could think of that afternoon after the breakfast and throughout actually was, I just did this to a human being. We just did this. It still makes me upset to think about that I would do that. And from a development standpoint, that's all I was thinking about that day. And I can't imagine how painful and harmful it was to hear from someone who's supposed to care about you as an individual say, I still need you to get out there. And that was awful. And so I felt like we were victimizing people in that moment. And it was right in my face. And I had been one of the people to do that. And so after that moment, I said, no, we can't do this anymore. And our staff who were in direct services, like our actual coaches who were working with people, were like, thank goodness, like it's about time, because they had been really uncomfortable. Again, you know, they're the ones who are asking them, hey, will you tell your story? And even that gentleman who, you know, who had a really difficult time, who went there, who was so kind to even just allow people to hear his story. I remember part of his story talking about how he worked at Wendy's. And this is 5 years ago, but it was so powerful. And about 2 weeks later, he called and said, hey, I had someone stop by the drive-thru on Wendy's asking for me because they wanted to see if I really did work there. And they wanted to, and when they saw me, they got really excited and said, hey, I know you from this place. And so again, it continued to confirm for us that this is a small town. It's a small city, a small county. And people tend to be very, they wanted to just kind of honor him by going to there and say, hey, I saw you and I'm really proud of you. But what ended up happening was that he got a little more embarrassed. And it ended up happening that he got recognized not by, hey, I'm amazing, I'm working at Wendy's, I'm a dad, I'm doing really good, but by the story of being the OAR participant. And that's not what we want anybody to be recognized for. And so immediately we began to say, how can we do this differently? And so we started prepping. I know one of the things that we like to talk about is some like tangible things to do. And so we started prepping for the next year and said, we're not going to do this. So what we did was we said, we need to get some actors. And we found some actors, we found some stories. We found some storytellers. We had casting auditions, which is super cool. And so we had some storytellers that came in to tell the story, and we gave them their story. And again, I mentioned we pay every time we get the story and every time we use them. And it's not much, it's $25, but you know, it's still value, right, for someone. And so, and that's what we started to do. And it was a huge, it was a huge kind of scare for me, because I thought, man, people for the last 10 years have been used to listen, or for the last 8 years have been used to listening to a person get up on stage and do this. And now here I come as a new executive director, and we're going to not do this anymore. And so I did a video trying to kind of explain what ethical storytelling was. Our team called several of our major donors to tell them, hey, this is what to expect. And the next breakfast that we did was a hit. Yes, people missed it. You know, people said, oh, I wish, you know, but otherwise people felt like, wow, this really does make sense for us to move in that direction. And so now, ever since then, that's where we go. And I really want to encourage everybody to do that. All of our nonprofits who are out there in the world to move in that direction, because it just makes such a difference in the lives of anybody who has to even talk about this is to a participant or to a donor.
Great. Thank you for two things. One of them being for sharing that example. I really appreciate it. And the second one being You're actually making my job easier because you're answering all my questions before I can ask them. So I actually only have one more question for you. And again, like you mentioned earlier, we're talking about these like tangible items that we can share kind of sector wide. So again, just what is like a first step an organization can take in moving towards an ethical storytelling practice?
Yeah, it's so interesting because one of the things we discovered is the justification we get back from folks who say, oh, but they say they want to do it. Like, so we often get the, oh, but they say they want to do it. Well, they might want to do it today because they feel like you have done so much for them that they owe this to you. But maybe 5 years later, with the way that social media is and where the internet is, and their picture is out there and their name might be out there and their story might be out there and an employer might search them, they might not want to do that anymore, or their child might search them and they might not want to do that anymore. I remember having a situation too where one of the public schools in our area, one of the teachers came, and one of the administrators of the public school came and heard the story and then realized that it was a parent of one of their children, and they weren't allowed to do field trips anymore. Even though this has been 10 years, a long, long time ago, it's unfortunate, but it does create a bias in people. And so imagine this father who had been doing field trips with their child for 5 years, no problem, all of a sudden can't because they saw them at an OAR breakfast. Again, it's like, it's awful for everybody, but it's certainly awful for OAR because we don't want to be to the detriment of anybody. That's not what we're here for. And so I think a first step is analyzing that it is possible that someone might want to do it today, but that doesn't mean that 5 years from now, when they're searched through, a Google search or whatever in the internet, that they're going to be in the same place. We thought, okay, what if we don't use their names, and we asked people not to post them, and so we asked all the breakfast people not to take pictures and of course we couldn't police that. Immediately it was on Twitter, so you really can't. And so I think really analyzing that there are ways to do this, and it's not going to hurt your bottom line. For OAR, it actually, up until the COVID pandemic, it actually increased the way increased our funding, because people were thinking it was innovative and it was also just justice for folks. We don't want this to follow people for the rest of their lives. And we do that if we don't allow actors or storytellers to be the ones who tell the story. We partner with a really good video company who was able to support us in actually looking at, well, how do we do this? And they got some actors for us too. And they got some really good kind of physical shots that were, again, not at the person's house, not anywhere near where they could be found. And so it was very different. So there's people out there who are willing to do this work. It is a decision that will take a lot of courage, but once you do it, it will feel so much better. And it will feel like you're ultimately, you need to be able to sleep at night. I wanted to be able to sleep at night. And after that incident, I was struggling too. And so now with ethical storytelling, it makes things just so much different, and it makes them better for everyone. So I would encourage, our nonprofit world and anybody else who uses participant stories to really, again, from a anti-racism liberation mindset, when we're looking at the word liberation, what is going to create liberation for that person 5, 10, 20 years from now? And how are you, if any, affecting that liberation or putting that at risk? And that's not how we want anything to happen. We don't want any harm we don't want to be the ones who bring harm. And that putting people up on and speaking, in our experience and for OAR, has not been helpful. So I would just, I would lift up that there is so many more ways to do this, and that now is the time to do it, when people are much more open to looking at things from a different lens and a different mindset. And just prepare your audiences, and that's what we did, and we're just honored that the community has responded in that way.
Great. Well, thank you again, Elizabeth, so much for sharing your experience with this. I think it's going to be super helpful for our listeners and members and the nonprofit sector in general. So thank you again so much for being here with us today. Thank you, Ian, for joining us too. And just a reminder to everyone to keep an eye out for all 4 videos that will be released shortly. Thank you so much.